What's up, guys? We are back in the shop again today, and it is time to perform a little bit of maintenance on the old 4Runner. Recently, I've been noticing when we're out off-roading that I've got a little bit of looseness coming from the front right. So I got home, checked it out, and sure enough, my lower ball joint on the right side is starting to show signs of a little bit of wear. The left side, not so much. It seems pretty good, but when replacing them, go ahead and replace them both. Obviously, they are one of the ultimate failure points of these 4Runners. And the last thing you want to do is replace the right one and then the left one takes a shit on you. I will show you guys how you can check for play in your lower ball joints, but a rough guideline that I believe I've heard is about 80,000 miles or so if you're just got normal use on your vehicle. If you're off-roading quite a bit, hitting the trails, you're probably going to want to replace them a little bit more often just to make sure, because they're going to be taking a beating more than if you just have road use on your vehicle. So I'm pretty sure I'm at like 70,000 miles right now on mine since the last time I replaced them. So it's definitely that time again. Let's take a quick look at the tools you guys are going to need, and then I'll show you guys how to diagnose this yourself. Okay, so aside from the normal jack stands, pulling your wheels off, that sort of tooling, what you're going to need is a torque wrench. You're going to need probably a breaker bar in order to break free both the 4 bolts holding in your lower ball joint, as well as the castle nut on the very bottom of the ball joint. Ratchet, you're going to need a 24mm socket for the large castle nut on the lower ball joint, 14mm socket for the 4 bolts, maybe an extension, some pliers, dikes, because we're going to have to remove the cotter pin on the outer tie rod. And then you're going to need a puller for the outer tie rod joint, and you're also going to need a puller for the large lower ball joint that we're actually replacing. You can just rent these from your local auto parts store. You don't have to buy them. I bought these the hard way, which was I rented them and then I forgot to return them, and I paid a lot of money for them. So don't do what I did. Return them. Here's a look at the parts that you're going to need. You've got both lower ball joints, and these are Toyota OEM ball joints. And I highly recommend that you guys also use OEM Toyota lower ball joints. This is a critical failure point of these vehicles, and there are too many cases of people going with Moog or some other aftermarket and they fail prematurely. So strongly recommend you just go ahead and pay the little bit of extra money to get these. They're not terrible. I'll show you the pricing, but you can tell left versus right on this little ear that sticks off on the bottom. This one will have an R right there. Not sure if you can make that out. And the left will have a left. And then you want to replace the bolts that hold the lower ball joint in. Here's the part numbers that you're going to need. You've got your 2 ball joints. And there are the part numbers. I'll also drop these down below in the description. But here are the part numbers. And I ended up buying them from Toyota Parts Eurosman, it looks like, and they were about 115 bucks a piece and $2 a piece on the bolts, so not too bad. And also, you don't have to worry about buying new castle nuts, because new castle nuts actually come with the lower ball joints when you order them, at least from Toyota. All right, so in order to check if you have some worn out lower ball joints, first thing you need to do is get the vehicle jacked up in the air, and you want to make sure that you're lifting up on the underside of the lower control arm or the spindle itself. You don't want to be just jacked up on your frame, because you're going to have movement from your suspension if you do that. So support it underneath the lower control arm, and what we're going to do is we're going to get a pry bar. Probably want to get the biggest one you've got. And we want to sort of wedge it in between this lower spindle mount, and I'm going to put it up underneath these bolts for the lower ball joint. And essentially what we're going to do is we're just going to provide a leveraging force in between them, and we're looking for movement right in here. We're looking for movement in between this mount and this boot, essentially. And I think Toyota says, you know, something like a millimeter or so movement, or yeah, something along those lines, is going to be too much movement. So pretty much if we see any movement, you're going to want to go ahead and replace it. So I'm going to do this, and actually with how worn this one is, you can actually hear it have a little clink when it returns to neutral position. So that may be hard to tell. And I know I was doing a bad job keeping the camera still, but that's the idea. If you see any movement when you're prying between those, you're going to want to go ahead and get your lower ball joints replaced, because they're probably not too far out from failing. Not trying to scare you. It's not like it's going to happen tomorrow probably, but you probably don't want to push it off too long. Okay, now what you're going to do is you are going to grab your most trusty pair of dikes, and you're going to come over here to your outer tie rod, and we are going to first pop this cotter pin out of here. There we go. Okay. And you can see why we're probably not going to want to reuse that cotter pin. Swing. Okay, now grab a 19mm socket, pop that on there. You can just try and break this free with a wrench or a ratchet, but I'm going to go ahead and put the impact gun on it, because sometimes that stud can break free from this joint and it'll just sit there and spin, and then you got a little bit more work ahead of you. So I'm hoping by using the impact right off the bat, we can break it free and we won't have that problem. There we go. Got lucky on that one. If you are in the Midwest, which I used to be, have fun with all these bolts. Just have fun. Okay, so unfortunately, I've got two of these different pullers, and I can't seem to finagle either one around. This one doesn't appear to be quite wide enough in order to slip it on there, and it's hitting right here. And I've tried slipping it around this back way, and nothing seems to get me where I need to be, unfortunately. You might be faced with a similar situation, or maybe yours is just really seized on there. So I'm gonna go the route that I didn't want to have to go, but I'm gonna use a small sledgehammer, and we're gonna beat on this stud. What I'm gonna do is I'm gonna thread that nut back on until it's flush with the end of this stud. And that way I've got a lot more material to hit on and a less likely chance of deforming this. Because if you deform this a lot, it won't even pop out of your lower ball joint. So you want to be cautious of that. I'm also going to hop into the car and turn the steering wheel to bring this further out, so I've got better clearance to hit that. All right, now that we've got the outer tie rod disconnected, we're going to come down here to the bottom of the ball joint where we have our castle nut, and you should have a cotter pin running through it. So we need to get that out of there. There we go. Now that we got that out, grab your breaker bar and your 24mm socket. Break that castle nut free. Ugh. Okay, castle nuts off. Now we are going to grab our 14mm socket and crack all four of these bolts free. We're not going to completely remove them just yet. Had to go through some iPro on. I've got probably 70 pounds worth of mud and dirt caked underneath here. Now you're going to grab your large puller that you have gotten from the auto parts store or from wherever. We're going to slip this up underneath here. So when you slip this joint puller up in here, you're probably going to chew up this rubber boot, but we don't really care because we're replacing the lower ball joint anyway. So Get it all the way in there, get it centered up on the stud. Start threading that in there. And this might have a metric size, but for me on this one, it's 11/16. Your mileage may vary. So you're just gonna start tightening it down and just get ready for the big bang where it pops free and there it goes. Once that breaks free, you can loosen the jaw puller up a little bit and slip it out of there. Go ahead and you can either buzz these off just with your ratchet. I'm going to use an impact driver just to make life a little bit easier on myself. So go ahead and pop off these 4 bolts. And you don't need to worry about keeping them if you bought new bolts, which you should buy new bolts. So our lower ball joint is now completely disconnected from the lower control arm and the spindle. So all we need to do is pick up on it. And it is heavy. We'll set that down gently. Having a second set of hands can also help. I'm going to use a brush to try to clean up all these mating surfaces though. Because dirt and rust can lead to not having a perfectly flat surface. So, clean up that mating surface. Always do a good double check to make sure that they match each other. And they do, and they both say L for left side. So that's a good start. Now we need to lift up on the spindle and rotor and get this popped in. I just had to get a little creative because my CV axle slipped out from the main hub, I guess, that inserts into the front differential. And that wasn't fun to correct. And that is why I now have this jack in place and a precariously situated 2x4. Don't love it, but that's what we've got for right now. So what I'm gonna go ahead and do is I'm going to get the new lower ball joint attached to the spindle. Just get the bolt started, and then we will drop the main bolt down into, or the main U-joint bolt, I guess, down into the lower control arm, and then we'll get it all bolted up. So that's the plan. And when you install these bolts, you should use blue Loctite. And it doesn't take a crazy amount. A lot of people don't understand Loctite and how to use it. So when you're applying Loctite to a bolt, all you need to do is put drop and a half, 2 drops on the last bit of the threads. And then when you thread it and engage it, all that Loctite is going to spread out throughout the remainder of those threads, and you'll be good. You don't want to put a gallon of Loctite on a bolt. That's silly. Make sure you have it oriented the correct way. And it should sort of lock into place because 2 of these mounts actually have an offset or a standoff that is concentric to the hole above it. So it will actually sort of locate itself. Okay. Grab our next bolt and some Loctite. Again, drop and a half there on the end. That's all you need. This is one of those cases where more does not equal better. And generally when installing anything with a bolt pattern, if you've watched anything else I've done, you know, you want to go you don't want to go left, left, right, right. You want to do sort of a crisscross or a star pattern. So for us, since we have 4 bolts, we'll do one, and then diagonal, then one next to it, and then diagonal. And we'll do the exact same method when we torque them. Okay, now we just need to lower the whole assembly and get this bolt to insert into here. You can use the jack to raise your lower control arm up to it. Okay, now that we have the new ball joint inserted into the lower control arm mount, just thread on your castle nut. And grab your torque wrench. So grab your torque wrench, and we're going to be torquing this to 105 foot-pounds. But I like to sort of work my torque up. So I'm going to start at 80. We are lined up, so that's good. So grab your new cotter pin that came with it. Pop that in there. And then be a man and bend it with your fingers. Okay. Cool, that's in there. Now we need to torque these 4 lower bolts. And we are going to torque these to 59 foot-pounds. All 4 of them, 59 foot-pounds. And again, I'm not going to tighten all 4 of them in a circle. We're going to do a cross pattern. And I'm going to snug them all up as we work towards that. Snug. And that's snug. That's snug. And snug. So now we'll take this one to torque. That's 59 foot-pounds. Go diagonal from it. 59 foot-pounds. All right, so now just grab your castle nut and your new cotter pin and go ahead and insert the tie rod into the lower ball joint. Just like that. Thread your castle nut on. And your castle nut, we are going to torque to 67 foot-pounds. And when this is using a 19mm socket. There you go. It's 67. And okay, so here's a good point. So whenever you take it to torque, if your hole does not align with the slots in your castle nut, you do not back off torque. You just tighten it a little bit more until you reach alignment with your castle nut and your hole through your bolt. So you go actually a little bit tighter than spec. And you want to do this as minimally as possible, but sometimes you got to do it to line up. Okay. Here we go. I use my calibrated metric adjustable wrench to bend that. You can use whatever you want. All right, guys, so that's really all there is to it. It's a pretty simple job. You can get a couple free rental tools from the auto parts store and get your lower ball joints. If you have not done this and you own a vehicle with over 100,000 miles, you need to get on this. And if you bought it used, there's no way of knowing when the previous person got them replaced. So please lift up your vehicle, check your lower ball joints. If you see any play, go ahead and get some new factory Toyota lower ball joints ordered and get them replaced. You will be happy that you did. All you got to do is a quick Google search on lower ball joint failure on Toyota 4Runners, and you'll see why you want to hop on it. So it's not a hard job. All you need is those ball joint pullers and then some basic tools. Lift the vehicle up, put it on jack stands, pop out the old one, pop in the new one. It's really a pretty simple replacement. Just make sure that you guys are following the torque specs. Again, I've also seen instances of where people had the bolts fail. So if you're thinking, I'm going to save 12 bucks and not buy new bolts, well, don't be that guy. Just buy some new bolts. They're 8 bucks, 10 bucks, 12 bucks, whatever it is. Just go ahead and buy a few new bolts. It's a drop in the bucket, and it's peace of mind to make sure that you are not one of the photos online that is a 4Runner run off the side of the road because his lower ball joint failed. So if you guys have any questions, please feel free to drop them down in the comments below. I always do my best to answer questions and comments. In the description, you will find part numbers, torque specs, all that goodness. Yeah, let me know if you guys have any questions. As always, I appreciate you guys watching the video. I'll catch you on the next one.